Queues in the programming world work just as it works in the real life, where we have a list of all the processes that need to happen and they can't all happen at the same time. That's why we keep the line. And we'll create the queue using Cloudflare. So once you stand in line, if you think of that like the ticketing machine that usually gives you a ticket, that would be what producer worker does. Producer worker registers a message, sends a message to the queue. And then we have, once your queue number is called out, that there's like a counter that shows what available numbers are there. That would be a consumer worker. When consumer worker sees that there's a message coming in the queue, it gets triggered and it takes the message and it processes it. So usually if we need to keep the order, that's also possible. We can process only one job at a time. You can process multiple jobs at a time. And there's different like variations. But the main idea behind the queues is to handle background tasks. And one example of this would be sending an email. So usually when you sign up for a new application, you get a welcome email, and that happens on the background. There's also resizing images. We could have generating reports. Maybe that report gets sent to your email as well. Also, a lot of times it's used in the e-commerce where there's like different orders coming in and there's few steps to process the order. There's like a payment, there's inventory management, and also confirmation notifications that gets sent out. Sometimes maybe you're using a third-party API that has like a rate limiting, but you need to call it a certain time. So you add that on a queue and you delay like request for later, so you don't hit that rate limit and your response doesn't get like rejected. User notifications and messaging is another one, and also just in general to like decouple services. You can have some services running separately or have asynchronous processing. And creating a queue or just using queues in general in Cloudflare does require workers paid plan, but just using queues does not add to additional costs. So if you have below 1 million operations per month, then that would not incur the additional cost. And then for the paid plan itself, I believe it is $5 per month. And once you have your account created in the dashboard, we can go to workers and pages section and there will be queues part. The creating queue itself is very simple. We just need to create queue here, give it a name. I'll do queue tutorial. That's it. The reason it says inactive because we don't have any registered producer worker or consumer worker right now. So there's no way to like post messages here. We can send them from the dashboard, but we also need a worker to be able to programmatically send. So let's create them. So in addition to your Cloudflare account, to create a worker project, and we're gonna do it locally on our machines, you'd need Node.js installed. And using the npm, we'll create a project. I'm gonna go to my terminal and paste this command for npm create. I'll just update the name of tutorial workers because we'll create 2 of them. And if you don't have create Cloudflare installed, it would install it if you press Y, which is what I'm going to do. We would follow hello world example, hello world worker, and I'll just use JavaScript for this one. This will install all the required packages, list them in package.json and all the the modules. And then once do you want to use, I'll say yes for this and no for the deployment because we're gonna make changes first and then deploy. Okay, so now we seed into our project directory, workers, and here we can create the worker. So this step we actually can skip because we already created a worker from the dashboard. What we can do is set up a producer worker. So I'm gonna open this in my IDE. I'm using VS Code, and we'll go ahead to the wrangler.tml configuration file where we can include what is the name of our producer queue. So we can add this line of code, or they might already be like commented out. So queues producers, okay. So remove this comments. First, let's update the queue name. That would be the name of our queue. And for the binding, we have to give it a different name. So I'm gonna give it queue tutorial and then just binding. Now we need to update the code. So this would be for the producer worker. This is what it's being called when we want to add items to the queue. So it would send a message to it, and that would be in our... So in our source file, we have this index.js file, which once we deploy our workers, logic is defined here. So we don't have the TypeScript, so we can just remove this part, also the other typings. And it would take in, it's like a fetch request that you make to the API. Endpoints would get a URL once we deploy. And we can take in a request method, also headers, URL, even the objects, we can pass objects to it. And then for the env, what we have to do is here, we're gonna replace that with our binding name. So that would be queue tutorials, queue tutorial binding. And I'm gonna remove this dot here, so save that. This part we can add interface like typings for inside index.ts, but since we're not using TypeScript, we can skip this part. So now if we wanted to publish this worker, see what the endpoint URL looks like, we can run this command and it would be available to be called. So I'm going to open up terminal here from my IDE. I'll paste in this command. All right, now it's deployed to this URL. So if we were to go here from our browser, we would get the success back. All right, that's great, but then this registers and we can check the messages in the queue. So for example, if we do list messages, just the 10, we can see that it's been triggered from here. All right, so we have that message that got added to the queue, but now nothing happens because queue doesn't have a consumer worker. So to finish the process, we need to also add the consumer worker to indicate what should happen next. The way we define this is the queue, batch, and env, and this will take in all the messages to the env. So let's add that as a separate function. I'm gonna remove this type definition and this one as well. So what the code right now, the sample code does, it just takes in messages, adds JSON stringify since messages come back as object, and then we get a console log for that. And the next step is that we need to created the consumer worker, but it's not connected to our queue. And we can do that from here. So define that. And the queue name, same goes for here. So what maximum batch size does and maximum batch timeout is first how many messages do you want to have processed at the time. If you're doing something that you can do only one message at a time, then we can define, for example, this one. And if you have something that takes a larger time to process, you can increase this to be 5, 10, or even more. I guess that depends on what you're trying to process. And now once again, we can publish our worker. So this consumer changes npx wrangler deploy. And if we want to, so even if we call right now, so the way we call this is we can do it from the browser, we can do it from our terminal, like using a curl command or postman inside the web app. But we need to also see what the logs for this queue is. So we only so far in the console log get the logs for fetch, but we also need ones for queue. So for that, we're gonna do npx wrangler tail. This would start monitoring it, and you see how it says consumed from our queue. We should see that here. If we hit this one more time, and then it says consumed from our queue, body, URL, and all the other information. So now we have a producer worker and the consumer worker as well as the queue. So we have the whole part of like setting up the queue and the process and the jobs set up. I use queues in my newsletter project where the emails that needs to be sent to the subscribers are processed using the queue. So if you want to, and there I go deep dive into more functionality, and if you want to check that out, click on the link at the top right corner of the video. And for this one, what we can do here is, let's say if we are getting in the producer worker, we're getting data, we can, for example, for an order that's coming in, we can access that, and we can also turn this into a only post request only. So to restrict the request, what we can do is check if method. So it'd be one of those, either post or get delete the list. So if the method equals to post, then we do log await. We can add a return statement and response that it's invalid method. And we also send 401, I think is usually the status number for the invalid method. As for, we can access, so this would be the JSON that's coming in, and we can access the fields of this. So for example, constant, let's see, order ID would equal to body.order ID. Then we have constant order, maybe like item. And if we want to save the user ID that made the request of the order, we would get that as well. And here what it's doing is sending the log, so all the request information, but we don't really need to use all that. We can just send the information from the order that we need. So that would be just the item that contains order ID, order item, and user ID. And then when we read from here, what we can do is we can go through the messages and access the fields. So for example, if we only care about order items, we would do that equal to batch.messages. And instead of just regular map, we're gonna use flat map, since this would be, oh, actually we can use, and let's console log just the order items. We can deploy these changes, or if we, every time we change something, we want it to, on the local, automatically reload, and once we're done with making changes, then to deploy, we could just run npx wrangler dev. That would start a development environment that would run on localhost 8787. So if I try to, because we changed the method, if I try to like get access this, we would say that the method, it would print out an error. Oh, actually we did get an error that method is not defined. That's interesting. Oh, it should be log.method. All right, so good thing that we didn't. So we get this invalid method. To make a request to localhost, I do need to organize my tabs here. There's too many things going on, and make sure. So you can create a new request by clicking the plus here, select the method post, and then in the body we can do row JSON user ID. Then we do item. Let's make it Next.js course. All right, let's send the request. What do we get? Oh, I didn't do this. Success. Let's see if we get that data consumed from our queue. That seems to be empty. Let's try console logging messages again. Oh, we need to access the body first and then order item. All right. And we have this value for the order item field here. Let's say you want to get a notification in Slack about the items that have been purchased. So that would be like a task of the consumer, queue to a worker to process those. We can integrate a Slack API, add that into our worker function, and send those messages. Also include the information about the orders. So for sending messages, it's just I'm looking at their API documentation. You have to pick the conversation and then you compose a message. It could be text or something more complicated, but we'll just send the text. And as you can see, you need to get a token to access the API. Everyone has, if you register, you get your own token, which you have to use. So I'm gonna go to apps to create the token because I also don't have one. So, and I first have to sign in. And going back to the documentation, as I'm logged in, I can create an app and I will go with from scratch. I just need to get the UI queue tutorial, and I just created a workspace. Let's create the app in here. All right, we have client ID, client secret. So even though we created an app, we need to define its permissions. So in Slack language, it's called scopes. Let's go to auth and permissions inside our app, and we will have, I think, add auth scope in both token and then we select, I think, chat, write public, send messages to channels. Queue tutorial isn't member of. Yep, and then to write, you'll need chat write. So we're gonna add that additional scope. Let's also give channel read messages. So third part is not related to our workers, but we need to authorize the app to the workspace. So I guess if we go to basic information, install app, and actually it's not in basic information, it is inside install app. And let's click install to and the name of our workspace. So allow, it lists the scopes that we already defined, and here we get user auth token. This is the token that we're going to use to call our API. Auth token is a private information and we need to keep it secret, and we need to, the best practice is to access it using environment variables. And let's create those variables in our VS Code. So to create that inside our root project, we're gonna go and create a new file. We're gonna name it .dev.variables. It's grayed out since it should be git ignored, and we can double check if we go to the git ignore file here and we see the Wrangler project. It includes that, so you don't commit that to your Git version control. And I'm gonna do Slack API key or token, and then paste that here. All right, let's go to Slack. Using the browser, let's launch the workspace that I just created, and it's saying that it doesn't have app is a member of channels yet, and let's send messages in. Okay, so use the Slack in the browser. Do general next. Your workspace is ready to go. Start with limited free version. let's send a message, hello team. And if we do invite, I haven't used Slack in a long time. So add, okay, there's an option that pops up, add apps to this channel. And we're gonna add this one right here. Great. So we're not gonna be listening to events. We'll just be sending a message. If the app was configured or our API key works accordingly. So we're gonna call the API from our postman. Let's try the listing conversations first. So pasting the URL, it is a GET request, and for the authorization, in the headers we can add authorization and then bearer, copy our API key again. See if that lists us. Okay, so we get the channels here and all the information of the channels. Then compose a message. So I'm going to use this example. Go to the body, row, JSON, paste it, and we do need to get the channel ID. So we only have one channel. Actually, maybe there's more than one. As an example, okay, the general one that I just created. And making a post request. What else do we need? In the headers, content type, it's already application JSON. All right, and then the body. We got back the true, and we can check in our general that the Q tutorial indeed sent the message, hello world. Now we can integrate this into our worker and a JavaScript. We need to have this app, and it's for clients. So let's just make a request. So this would go here. I'm gonna remove this line and I'll do try and then catch. You can console log if there's any errors. So fetch would be, all right. Post request application JSON. Let's update this with the URL. And this is what it looks like. Channel, actually I'm just gonna copy the channel ID and define the body. We're gonna put be an object, and since after that we just use JSON stringify, and then we would have a text and the new order, and you would just list the order items. And let's pass that here. All right, one thing we're missing is the authorization header, so that would be. And to access the environment variable, so we can use env dot and the name of this. I named it API key. All right, and here I'm gonna try to post the message. Let's do something different. All right, examining the terminal post oh, I guess we don't console log the response, but let's see. Constant response equals to await fetch, and let's console log the data. So missing character set, okay. Invalid auth. Oh, let's reload, because once we added environment variable, sometimes it needs to read from the dev variables file. Okay. Sending one more time. All right, message. So we got back, okay, true. Oh, and then there's the message that's been added. All right, we are ready to deploy this now. Only thing is inside the worker settings, we have environment variables locally, but we would also need to add them inside our workers. So I'm gonna go here to workers and pages, select this Q tutorials workers. In the settings, we go to variables and secrets. We add what we have here and paste the value, and we can save the version and we can deploy the changes from the code from here. So I'll run one more time, npx wrangler deploy. I say it would overwrite the changes, so it's the best way to do this. We say yes. All right, let's try to make this request. Test the API endpoint for the production one. Right. Here we are. Alright, that would be it for this tutorial. Make sure to check out my next one where I'm also using queues. And thank you for watching.